Chapter 48. Oli encountered more Yelmes in groups of 3s and 4s. He had slung his bow over his back, no longer bothering with it. He had a new weapon, one which made him almost heady with power. Like smoke on the breeze, Oli could smell out the Yelmes now. They were strange and distinct compared to everything else he could sense. Whenever he felt a group of them, he charged in their direction, falling upon them at a sprint, ripping through their threads with hardly any effort. More red strands would waft up from their bodies, and he would take those and keep on. He did this again and again. Of all the encounters, only one Yelmes fighter had escaped, a thin-framed thing with her hair in a bun and a song on her lips. Oli cut down her companion, but when he'd sent a blast of power at her, she had dodged away and ran off. If Oli hadn't known better, he thought she deflected his thread knife. Maybe she had. Was that even possible with this power? Oli knew enough to know he knew less than nothing. He didn't understand what he did or even what he was. He knew only that, for years, he had trudged in and out of a maddeningly evil wood, barely surviving day to day. He'd never understood that either. If he were honest, he had only ever been following his father. He hadn't bothered to chase the woman. She wasn't between him and Layla, and so she didn't matter. Faster than he could have thought possible, Oli neared the tree line as the sun began its descent. And he laughed. He wasn't sure why, but it felt right to be happy. Something had finally, in all of his years, gone right. He had flown out of the wood in good time, unhindered even by the demons of Castraca. Who could stop him? Finally, after all this time, he would save someone. He would find Layla, and then he could protect her, and he would take care of them both. But as Oli stepped out of the wood and onto wheat-colored grass, he stopped laughing. Fires burned in small patches throughout the potato fields, and what wasn't currently on fire had been scorched black. The large buildings, which had once corralled manic animals, were largely destroyed as well. Cows, donkeys, chickens, and goats roamed free and aimless. Now that was odd. Each of them should have been in the wood by now, drawn by the call, and stranger still, Oli could hear bird songs outside the wood. Birds danced in the sky far above, in the clouds. Oli hadn't known they could fly so high. But down on the ground, the lowest stretches of Watchful smoldered with black smoke rising like incense. He had gotten there too late. Though he should have known. He wouldn't have encountered Yelmes in the woods if they hadn't already destroyed Watchful first. Except Watchful wasn't burnt to the ground entirely. The 3 wardens stood untouched. The mansions looked down upon the wreckage below with the same disinterest that the hilltoppers themselves might. And it wasn't just the wardens, but most of the homes further up the hill still stood. But there had been fighting, which meant there had been dying, and Layla was in there somewhere. Oli made the trek into town quickly, ignoring the stares from haggard soldiers. Everyone looked worse for the wear, covered in soot or blood or both. Most of the homes at the bottom of the hill were gone entirely, nothing more than a few blackened beams. It got slightly better as he followed the road upward, but even that was still bad. Yelmes' bodies had been haphazardly stacked in piles to the side. Debris lay everywhere, and men and women carried buckets of water from the wells in a daze, dumping them on the remaining flames throughout the town. They let the fields burn. Oli could see everyone twice, once with his eyes and again with this new sense. He could still feel the presence of others further away, but outside the wood, his power felt dimmer, as if the sense was muddied or muffled. Though he tried, he couldn't seem to sense Layla, though he had no reason to think he'd be able to tell her apart from any other person. Still, his heart raced faster the further up he went, his gut twisting at the thought that he wouldn't find her among the living. He began shouting her name. The downwind rested in ashes, but his home remained miraculously intact. Ollie sprinted to the door, pushing open as a gaggle of people who cursed in his wake, but Ollie didn't care. The door hung ajar, but he slammed it open the rest of the way, so hard that a hinge broke. "Layla!" Darkness greeted him. Ollie panted, looking around the home, ready to begin toppling furniture as if he'd find his sister beneath the dinner table. But it looked as if someone had already done that. The table lay sideways, sheets were scattered, the contents of the bookshelf mostly on the floor. A bloody knife lay near the fireplace, and beside it, a red blanket in a lump. Ollie stopped. There were white threads, faint but visible, coming from within the blanket on the floor. "Fool," Ollie said, tears already filling his eyes. Oh, he knew who it was. "Tuck, I'm such a bloody fool." He approached slowly, kneeling beside Tuck as carefully as he could. The pup's eyes opened, but there was little life left in him. When was the last time he'd even considered the dog? The bandage Inej had given him was redder than his fur, and much of him was already covered in the soot and ash from the burning outside. His nose had dried and cracked, his tongue lolled from his mouth. "I'm so sorry." Ollie lifted Tuck onto his lap, running his fingers through the fur on his head, scratching behind his ears. The white threads weren't merely faint, they were broken, snapped entirely in dozens of places. "I'm a fool. I'm such a fool." Ollie had forgotten about him. He hadn't meant to, but he had. His life had been shaken upside down, and his sister had consumed his thoughts so much that he'd spared none, wondering where Tuck was, or how he was. Inej was supposed to take care of Tuck, though Ollie wasn't sure why he had trusted the tanner. The Velk had probably bolted when the Yelmes arrived, stopping only long enough to ensure Tuck didn't die inside of his cabin. The thought of Inej dumping Tuck here angered him, and that anger only widened and grew. Inej wasn't the only one at fault. The princess had dragged him away and ultimately gotten his mother killed. None of it would have happened if his father had been here, but he'd been too stupid and too ambitious, and he'd gotten himself killed. And none of it was fair, and none of it was right. And Ollie was no better than any of them. The self-loathing appeared right there, easy for Ollie to grab and wield against himself. He was as much an idiot as his father. He'd gotten his mother killed as much as the princess had, and he had treated Tuck far worse than Inej. He deserved to watch his friend die. He deserved worse. It was Tuck who had done nothing wrong, and Layla too. The two of them were the victims in the end. Ollie squeezed Tuck hard, gritting his teeth to keep back the rest of the tears. Tuck wriggled in his gasp, squirming and pushing at Ollie's chest, but Ollie held him harder and harder. And Tuck barked. The sound was so loud, Ollie jumped and nearly threw Tuck as he did. But the moment he eased his hold on Tuck, the dog twisted in his lap and licked Ollie's face, scouring his neck, chin, and cheek with his coarse tongue. "What? Tuck, how?" But Ollie didn't care. He cried in earnest now, letting Tuck lick him and paw at his chest. Through the tears, he could see Tuck's threads, and then he understood, if only a little, what had happened. In all the places where Tuck's white threads had snapped, red threads had been grafted in to connect the bonds. He had seen the Yelmes do it to himself after the arrow wound, and somehow he had done it to Tuck. All the red threads which had been floating around his hands a moment before, they were gone. "I healed him." Ollie stared at those threads inside Tuck, even as the dog continued to lick and scratch at his chest, begging for his attention. "I healed." Is this what the priests did? Is this how their miracles worked? A shadow fell over Ollie from the doorway, and he turned to see Captain Thibault standing there, sword in hand. Blood was caked along the toes of his boots, and his surcoat was torn in a dozen places. Soot smeared his face, and his eyes looked bloodshot. "Welcome home," Thibault said. "Now, where is Princess Baudelaire?"